I think it's an important talk, and it's an important subject, what I mean to say. I want to begin by acknowledging that the title for this event is U.T. Martin, Systemically Racist. It's a question, but when you look at it in reality, it is no question at all. The University of Tennessee at Martin is systemically racist. U.T. Martin is part and parcel. It's it's part of a major institution in United States society. And United States society is itself a white supremacist society. I know that, I suspect that for most black people in the United States, that statement, the United States of America is a white supremacist society, is not at all surprising. I think for white people, it is extremely surprising. It is extremely difficult for us as white people to see. And it makes sense that it would be difficult. We have been born white in a white society. And being born white in a white society means that everything we see seems to be natural, and seems to be normal, and seems to be the way things are done. Tonight, I intend to ask all white people here to see the white supremacy of this country and the systemic racism, which is really the same thing as white supremacy, the systemic racism of this school. I want to ask you to try to see it and recognize that white supremacy is damaging, is deadly, not only to black people, but to white people. Some people here might tonight may be questioning why it is that an old white man is standing in front of you talking about white supremacy and talking about racism. Friends, black people have been asking us, white people, for a long time to take responsibility for racism. Racism is our responsibility. And so that's why I'm here tonight, and that's why I am especially talking to all the white people who are here tonight. Some of you may know that 2 years ago, a group called the Black History Matters Coalition, of which I was a part, raised a demand on this campus for a requirement in the study of black history and culture. We understood at the time that the main problem, the single most important thing that upholds white supremacy in this society is the ignorance of white people as to the real history of this country. And the real history of this country is black history. I will be talking about the struggle we waged 2 years ago to address that ignorance. That's what the struggle for a requirement is about, to address that ignorance. But I want to be clear here then about the meaning of black history and its importance to white people, us white people. African American history, black history means this. Doesn't mean we get a day or two of Martin Luther King. It means that we examine the whole of American history. We examine the whole of American history from the standpoint, through the eyes and the experience of black people. That's what black history is, the whole of American history through the eyes of black people. To examine our country's history as it plays out in the experience of black people. When you think about it, it should be incredibly interesting. For white people, it should be incredibly interesting. To see, for example, the slave owner who wrote these famous words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, amongst these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." To see that man, Thomas Jefferson, through the eyes of the slave who tended to his every need as he was writing the Declaration of Independence, I think that would be pretty interesting, don't you? Robert Hemings was that enslaved servant of enslaved servant of Jefferson's needs when he was laboring over the Declaration. Robert, of course, was the older brother of Sally Hemings, was the woman by whom Thomas Jefferson had 6 children, starting when Sally was 15 or 16 years old. Sally and Robert Hemings were themselves the half-siblings to Thomas Jefferson's wife, Martha Washington. So the Hemings in the Jefferson household were amongst in not through the eyes of the most privileged slaves, but through the eyes of the hundreds of slaves who worked Jefferson's estates, the human beings who were whipped, the human beings who were bought and sold. And I want you to remember that as those slaves were working the fields, Thomas Jefferson was prancing and preening before world history as a champion of freedom. Well, we will never know what the human beings Jefferson enslaved thought of him, but we can come close. We can listen to Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was a man who was held in chains until he was 20 years old. And he taught himself to read and write in violation of the law of that time. Any age would honor this self-taught man as an intellect of extraordinary power. Here from Douglass's 4th of July speech, 1852. What to the American slaves is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is a constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciations of tyrants brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality hollow mockery, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity are, to him, mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world, travel through South America, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without rival. When we look at this country's history through the eyes of black people, we are afforded a unique opportunity to see white people, to see ourselves as we actually are in the world, and not as we fancy ourselves to be. Is there anything more necessary or more valuable for us to study than this unvarnished picture of who we really are as a people? Indeed, no individual and no nation can ever achieve maturity, can ever grow, can ever change, can ever become a better people without first seeing who they actually are. The great crisis that this country finds itself in today, and I hope we all know that we are in a great crisis. The great crisis that this country finds itself in today is rooted, friends, in our inability, in white people's inability and refusal to see ourselves as we really are, even as we desperately cling to the fantasy that we are the greatest, the most benevolent, the most freedom-loving people this world has ever known. Before getting into a discussion of the systemic racism of this school, I need to illustrate and define the meaning of systemic racism. Back in 1967, in the last book he would author before an assassin took his life, Martin Luther King described the condition of black people at that time. He said, "Of the good things in life, the black person has approximately 1/2 those of whites. Of the bad, he has twice those of whites. Thus, half of all Negroes live in substandard housing, and Negroes have half the income of whites. When we turn to the negative experience of life, the Negro has a double share. There are twice as many unemployed. The rate of infant mortality among Negroes is double that of whites. In elementary schools, Negroes lag 1 to 3 years behind whites, and their segregated schools receive substantially less money per students than do white schools." Friends, despite all the talk of progress since the 1960s, very little has changed in the 55 years since Martin Luther King wrote those words. The reality is today, as it was in the 1960s, that black infant mortality rates are still double white infant mortality rates. That black unemployment is still double white unemployment. That black people still earn only 60% of what white people earn. That the median wealth of white households is 8 times higher than the median wealth of black households. Black men are incarcerated today at 5 times the rate of white men in virtually every measure of life, in education, housing, employment, income, family wealth, criminal justice. Black people live as far behind white people today as they did in the year 1967. We have really only 2 ways of explaining this. We either can join with the slaveholders and the Ku Klux Klanners of years past and say that black people are on the bottom of society because they are inherently lazy, immature, immoral. We can keep on going with many of these adjectives. Many people, many white people in this country say that today, that black people are behind because they just don't make the grade. The alternative is that we can answer the question by acknowledging that this country today is still living in a past that has created and continues to create black inequality, systemic racism. That black people today are living in a country that first enslaved them, then brutally segregated and lynched them, and today continues to lynch them, segregate them, criminalize them, and keep them on the bottom of this white supremacist society of ours. That's it. You either explain black inequality the way the slaveholders justified slavery, or you acknowledge that we live in a white supremacist society. The concept of systemic racism was one of the great discoveries black people made in the 1960s. And the man who first articulated that discovery was Stokely Carmichael, a chairman and member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Give me a second here. I'm just curious. How many people here have heard of Stokely Carmichael? Raise hands high. 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 Okay, thank you very much. Some of the older heads in here. And some young. In his 1967 book, co-authored with a black political scientist named Charles V. Hamilton, The name of the book was Black Power. Stokely said this: there are two types of racism. Individual whites acting against individual blacks, and acts by the total white community against the black community. We call these individual racism and institutional racism. The first consists of overt acts by individuals. The second type is less overt, far more subtle, less identifiable in terms of specific individuals committing the acts. The second type originates in the operation of established and respected forces in the society, and thus receives far less public condemnation than the first type. He continues, when white terrorists bomb a black church and kill 5 black children, that is an act of individual racism, widely deplored by most segments of the society. But when in that same city, Birmingham, Alabama, 500 black babies die each year because of the lack of proper food, shelter, and medical facilities, and thousands more are destroyed and maimed physically, emotionally, and intellectually because of conditions of poverty and discrimination in the black community, that is a function of institutional racism. It is institutional racism that keeps black people locked in dilapidated slum tenements, subject to the daily prey of exploitative slumlords, merchants, loan sharks, and discriminatory real estate agents. The society either pretends it does not know of this latter situation, or is in fact incapable of doing anything meaningful about it. Thus, and this is very important, acts of overt individual racism may not typify the society, but institutional racism does, with the support of covert individual attitudes of racism. I'd like to now turn to the specific case of the University of Tennessee at Martin. I want to look first at how our university responded to recent pieces of legislation. In the spring of 2021, our state legislature passed and our governor signed the first of these 2 pieces of openly white supremacist legislation. This is the so-called anti-critical race theory law. Stripped of all its camouflage, this legislation effectively bars the teaching of black history in our K-12 schools. In a statement it issued last year, the American Historical Association, joined by over 150 other academic associations, named the clear goal of this anti-CRT legislation. I'm sorry, that was the best I can do. My technology is not good. Quote, the clear goal of these efforts is to suppress teaching and learning about the role of racism in the history of the United States. To suppress teaching and learning about the role of racism in American history is to defend racism, is to conceal racism, is to conceal America's system of white supremacy. No one can argue this point. I challenge our administration. I challenge Keith Carver. I challenge the entire administration, the UT administration in Knoxville, President Randy Boyd. I challenge them to deny what I just said. The K-12 law, the CRT law, conceals racism. It defends racism. It defends white supremacy. How did our University of Tennessee system leadership respond to this white supremacist legislation? These are the educational leaders in the state of Tennessee. Our UT system leaders are the leaders of leading educators in the state of Tennessee. How did they respond? UT President Randy Boyd, UTK Chancellor Don Bay Plowman, our own Chancellor Keith Carver, and all the other chancellors in the UT system should immediately have condemned this racist legislation, this white supremacist legislation. So too should the Faculty Senate. As far as education is concerned, this law violates the most basic tenets of education. What did our UT administration do? What did the faculty senates on all the different campuses do? What did they say? Nothing. Our administration and faculty senate leadership may disregard the responsibility they have as leading educators in the state and excuse their refusal to condemn this law, saying that the law is aimed at K-12 and doesn't apply to us. I don't know if they say that or not, but it would be a pitiful excuse and it would be wrong. The law does apply to us. Tennessee today must have literally hundreds, UT Martin today must have literally hundreds of our graduates out teaching across the state of Tennessee. And all of these teachers, the elementary school teachers who teach social studies, the secondary ed teachers who teach history, they are affected by this law. Our graduates are affected by this law. All these teachers subject to this law, and the failure of our administration and our faculty senate leadership to condemn this law passes the burden of this law onto our graduates. If in their academic careers here at UT Martin, they've managed to get even a smidgen of the truth of the brutality of this white supremacist history of ours, they are now confronted with the choice of lying about that truth or losing their jobs. The same is true on a much larger scale for all our UT system trained teachers. The UT system leadership's failure to shoulder the moral and educational responsibility of condemning this racist legislation shifts that same moral and educational responsibility onto the shoulders of the teachers. And those teachers are far more vulnerable than our well-paid and very comfortable UT system leaders. Why it is that our UT leadership might so casually pass on the moral dilemma of lying or losing their jobs, I don't know. I don't know why they might have passed that on to the teachers. Perhaps it's possible that they simply assume that our UT-trained teachers will take this moral dilemma as easily, as lightly as they themselves evidently do. Most important of all, our UT leadership's failure here collaborates with nearly 400 years of white supremacist lies denying the role that black people have played in the building up of this country on the one hand, and on the other hand it collaborates with nearly 400 years of lies glorifying this nation as the world's greatest champion of freedom, democracy, and civilization. Am I wrong, ladies and gentlemen? Let's keep going. This past spring, our state government enacted its second piece of white supremacist education legislation.
Dr. Barber, you have several hands. Are you going to?
Oh, I didn't see them. I'm sorry. Yes.
I was just saying that she had a question. I didn't
Oh, I'm sorry.
Actually, in April of 2022, this House lawmakers voted 80-2 in favor of passing an amended version of this, which said that the law should require Black history to teach for grades 5 through 8.
Yes. Well, give me a second. I'm going to get to that. Okay. April what?
April 2022.
Yeah, April 2022 refers.
April 21st. April 21st of this year.
Of this year.
Yes, sir.
All right, I would like to see that, but I'm going to get to that in any case. Because again, the definition of black history is not we mention Martin Luther King. The definition of black history is seeing this country through the eyes of black people.
Right.
Let me get to that. This past spring, our state government enacted the second piece of white supremacist legislation, this time targeting higher education. This is the so-called divisive concepts law. This new law borrows the exact language defining 14 divisive concepts from last year's, same 14 from last year's K-12 law. Most of these banned divisive concepts are, as I intimated earlier, camouflage for the real heart of the law. And here's the real heart of the law. Subsections E, F, G, and H. An individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex, bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex. Immediately you have to say, well, of course, there's no way that a person today can be responsible for actions in the past. The actions of his ancestors, the actions of our ancestors, our predecessors in the past. We can't be responsible for what they did in the past, but we can be responsible for the consequences of what they did. What they did in the past was rob black people for 250 years and concentrated the wealth of 250 years of unrequited toil and put that in the hands not only of the slaveholders, but of almost the whole of white society. New York City was built in part off of slavery. The financial industry, the insurance industry, the shipbuilding industry, the first real mechanized industry in the United States built off of the cotton harvested by slaves. That's a consequence. Black people have inherited the poverty of that time, and white society has inherited the wealth of that time. And we have never made that good. This country has never made that good. F. An individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or another form of psychological distress solely because of the individual's race or sex. Sometimes I tell the story of Lation Scott. Anybody heard of Lation Scott? Lation Scott, 105 years ago, was the victim of one of the most brutal lynchings in the history of extraordinarily brutal lynchings. He was lynched about 50 miles down the road from here, Dyersburg, Tennessee. I am not going to go into the details of his lynching. I don't want to share the tremendous brutality that was visited upon this poor man. What I will say is that he was roasted for 3 hours. They deliberately kept him alive as long as they could, for 3 full hours roasting him. But the more horrifying thing than the manner of his death was the fact that literally thousands of people flocked to witness that death. The best people of Dyersburg flocked to witness that death. The riffraff of Dyersburg flocked to witness that death. It was a Sunday. Sunday school was letting out. Kids walking by came and watched. Parents brought their children. The crowd was so thick that many people could not even see Lation Scott being roasted. The only reason they knew anything was happening at all was they could smell the burning flesh. I often think about Lation Scott at that moment, looking out on this crowd of distinguished, patriotic white Americans. And I wonder what Lation Scott saw. When I tell that story, I hope we should be discomforted. We should be discomforted. And this K-12 law, bars discomfort. Somebody's discomforted, teacher gets fired. The meritocracy is inherently racist or sexist or designed by a particular race or sex to oppress another race or sex. A meritocracy, this is a mythology of the United States of America. We're a meritocracy is what we are. People are at the top because they've earned the right to be at the top. They've got the skills. They've got the correct personality. The reality is that this country denied black people access to education for hundreds of years, 250 years as slaves, another 100 years as a segregated people. Today, still, the worst schools are predominantly black schools, the worst schools in this country. So yeah, and why? Because we don't want to pay the price of educating black people in this country. Meritocracy? No. A meritocracy, the people who rise to the top are the people who got the best educations. The people who rise to the top are the ones who've got the connections. That's how it works. This state, or the United States, is fundamentally or irredeemably racist or sexist. You're not allowed to teach that. That's systemic racism. But again, as I said earlier, the simple fact of the matter is that today, as in the 1960s, as in the 1920s, and as far back as you want to take it, black people are still at the bottom of this society. And there's only one of two ways of explaining it. Either we have to condemn black people for being all those adjectives that are used in this country, or we have to say it is the system of white supremacy that has kept black people on the bottom. A fundamentally racist country. In regards to the second piece of legislation, the American Historical Association, in a direct letter to the Tennessee legislature, said this: formally, this bill would prohibit discriminatory teaching, but in effect, it would make it virtually impossible for teachers to help students understand the continuing impact of slavery and racism in American history. At the very least, teachers will be wary, uncertain as to the boundaries of the law. Since this law did directly affect public higher ed in the state of Tennessee, our UT system did have to say something. UTK Chancellor Donde Plowman and our Chancellor Keith Carver, each of them did issue statements. Both statements minimized the impact of this white supremacist law. They insisted that the UT, what they did do was they insisted that the UT system had successfully worked to guarantee that the law would not compromise our academic freedom. Unfortunately, even before this divisive concepts law was passed, Governor Lee and U.S. Senator Marsha Blackburn, foreshadowing the law, had already compromised academic freedom in 3 instances that I can name. For the sake of time, I'm going to run quickly through the first 2. The first involved Memphis. The University of Memphis passed it formulated a program for diversifying its curriculum. It asked teachers to find more diverse sources for each of their classes. Senator Blackburn and Governor Lee started shouting about, quote, a divisive radical agenda. And the school was forced to take back its program. In the second case, Senator Blackburn denounced the planned effort at UT Knoxville to create a critical race center. the folks putting this plan together had announced that the goal of this center was, quote, to enhance research and scholarship in this area of study and identify current racist policies and practices on campus. Identify current racist policies and practices on campus. In the wake of Blackburn's criticism, UTK quietly withdrew authorization for the plan. So yes, UTK has complete academic freedom, just so long as UTK faculty and students don't try to, quote, identify current racist policies and practices on campus. Third, right here at UT Martin, although we don't have a great deal of transparency on this matter, here is a story I've been able to piece together. In the spring of 2021, a small group of faculty managed to get a proposal for a general education diversity requirement. In other words, you're going to be required to take classes with some diverse perspectives. They managed to get that into the Faculty Senate, no small trick. It was scheduled to appear before one of the Faculty Senate committees in the spring of 2021. But for technical reasons, it was delayed. It was pushed back until the fall of 2021. In the summer of 2021, the UT Government Relations Office reached out to UTM Chancellor Keith Carver, cautioning him that this diversity requirement might run afoul of the legislation that had been pre-filed in Nashville. This is the legislation that we're talking about. While the diversity proposal likely would have failed in our Faculty Senate, which is a whole other story, right? In the wake of this warning, the proposal was pulled from Faculty Senate consideration. In short, while the UT system portrays this white supremacist law as harmless, the forces behind the law and the law as pre-filed in Nashville have already shut down 3 projects aimed at giving students in this state a slightly less white perspective. Instead of denouncing this legislation, our administration has obediently bowed down in front of Governor Lee, Senator Blackburn, and the mere prospect of a law. I now turn to the university's response, I now turn to the university's response to the demand for a requirement for the study of African American history and culture. This is the demand that we, the Black History Matters Coalition, put forward in 2020. In the starkest terms, we see this campus as institutional racism, systemic racism. 3 years ago next week, just before Thanksgiving break, a member of an overtly white supremacist organization put racist flyers on car windshields back over by the tennis courts in the rec center. Word quickly spread amongst the black students. That's how I found out about it. Black students in my class, they all had it on their phones, showed me. Word spread amongst the black students, and Chancellor Carver correctly ordered the campus police to collect the flyers off all the windshields that had not, that were still there. He also, if I recall correctly, issued a statement denouncing racism and calling the flyer, quote-unquote, disgusting. I wrote an article at that time titled White Supremacy and the Need for a Required Class in African American History. Let's see if I can read it from over here. This is the conclusion of the article. We have only one way in which we can secure the minds of our young white people against white supremacy. Safeguard them from the appeals of this new yet old white supremacy. The lock against any of our students falling prey to white supremacy is teaching them the truth about race in this country. the truth about the role that black people have played in building up of this country, the truth about the unfairness and cruelty and indifference of far too many white people, and the tremendous courage and resilience of black people resisting their oppression. That's the only way. A required class in African American history is the only defense we have against open white supremacy making deeper and deeper inroads onto our campus and into our society. The real test for our campus is not how loudly we denounce white supremacy, how disgusting we find it, but how steadfastly we commit ourselves to really educating our students in the history of this country, a country born in white supremacy. UT Martin needs a required class in African American history. I sent copies of this article to our Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. I said to him, this is something that we need to do. He referred me to a faculty senate person. I said I'd been referred to the faculty senate person by Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, Phil Cavalier, to get this into the faculty senate. He sent me a bunch of forms. I knew at that moment that the requirement in black history was a dead letter. Securing this requirement is not a matter of rules and procedures or forms to be filled out or deliberations and votes to be held behind closed doors in the faculty senate. We needed then and need now an open conversation on this campus about the importance of requiring classes in African American history and culture. That's what we needed then, that's what we need now, and that is the only way we will achieve on this campus a requirement for studying black history and culture, an open conversation. After the murder of George Floyd and the unprecedented, historic wave of social protest under the banner of Black Lives Matter, we again raised the demand for the requirement, this time forming a coalition, the Black History Matters Coalition. The administration and the faculty senate leadership responded by avoiding answer to any question we raised to them. Do you support a requirement for the study of African American history and culture? Dr. Carver would not answer that question. It wasn't his responsibility, he said. It was the faculty senate's responsibility. We asked Dr. Carver a second question. Is a knowledge of African American history and culture necessary for responsible citizenship in American society today? I don't know if you're all aware of this, but the mission statement of the University of Tennessee at Martin reads this: the University of Tennessee at Martin educates and engages responsible citizens to lead and serve in a diverse world. Responsible citizenship is the core of our mission statement. Can't even answer a question. Do you need black history and culture and understanding black history and culture to be a responsible citizen? In not answering that question, I would suggest to you that Dr. Carver did not take the role of a responsible citizen. We placed a resolution before the Faculty Senate Executive Committee, which concluded with these words. I'm going to read it from here. Therefore, be it resolved that the Faculty Senate of the University of Tennessee at Martin is committed to the development of a requirement for the study of African American experience within its general education curriculum. We were asking that the Faculty Senate commit itself, the leadership, to commit itself to supporting and helping to construct a requirement in Black history and culture. The Faculty Senate Executive Committee, in closed session, refused to vote on our resolution. They certainly did not want to come out against the resolution. That would expose UTM's institutional racism. But on the other hand, they could not come out for the resolution. We certainly don't want to jeopardize our relationship to the purse strings in Nashville. Sean Walker, who at the time was the Faculty Senate president, shared a written statement following the meeting. This is what he said. He stated that the committee, quote, decided to reaffirm the established process outlined in Chapter 5 of the Faculty Senate Handbook for curricular change request proposals. There's a proper way of going about doing these things. What is this if not institutional racism? Processes and procedures standing in the way of justice, standing in defense of white supremacy, defending the ongoing white supremacy that denies Black people the dignity of their history on the one hand, and denies to white people their ability to break from this nation's racist past and culture on the other hand. At different times over the course of our struggle, people who allegedly supported the demand for a requirement insisted it was going to happen, it would happen, but we needed to negotiate. We were told in the most certain terms by one of these alleged champions that the requirement would happen with or without us, and we should get on board and stop confronting the chancellor, stop confronting the administration, and work with the administration. Well, it's been 2 long years since we stopped confronting the administration. 2 long years, and guess what? Over those 2 long years, there has not on this campus been a single mention, not a single mention of a requirement in Black history. The only time it was ever mentioned was when we raised the issue. Moreover, those champions of negotiation failed to produce, not only did they fail to produce a requirement to study Black history, but those folks who did follow the correct procedure, that diversity requirement I told you about a few minutes ago, they failed to, didn't they? And I want to say something about that diversity proposal. And I want to say it very clearly. The diversity proposal was offered up by people who opposed our demand. It was offered up after we had raised the demand for a Black history requirement. It was a watered-down version. You get 2 weeks of Black people here, we'll get 2 weeks of Latino people, 2 weeks of this other and that, to the point where nobody gets an understanding of anything. Friends, we are in deep trouble in this country. We are facing a crisis of white supremacy. Make no mistake about it. Make America Great Again is a slogan of people pining for the good old days when Americans were white, when America ruled and robbed the world, and when Black people knew their place in this society. But those days are gone and they will never return. The more desperate do white Americans become in the face of their declining status in the world and their deteriorating way of life at home, the greater the violence they will unleash. Ignorance of our real history is the main prop for white supremacy, and it always will be. We have only one defense against this growing threat, and that is education. Tonight, I am calling upon the white people here. I am calling upon the white people here on this campus to take up as our demand, the demand for a requirement in African American history and culture. White people, white supremacy is our enemy, and it is our problem. It makes of us a cruel and soulless people. Black people have long been asking us, white people of goodwill, to take responsibility for this problem. I am calling upon white people here tonight to change our ways, to stop accepting the lowly status that this society imposes on black people as simply, well, it's just the way things are, as white folks have done for almost the entirety of our country's history. I am calling on white people to stop living this nightmare that we are in and change ourselves and change our reality, to open the door to a society in which all of us are truly brothers and sisters. I will not deceive you. To change ourselves and to change our reality is supremely difficult. But taking the first step in that direction is not so hard. We cannot change the world, but we can change this tiny place that we are at, the University of Tennessee at Martin. White people standing up and demanding here that we require that every student on this campus study and have a significant understanding of black history. That would be an unprecedented act. I just wonder if you can imagine how extraordinary that would be. That white people, lots of white people on this campus, stand up and say, we want this campus to require the study of black history. It would break so much, just that one single act. It would break so much of the history if we could do that. We have the ability to do something really extraordinary here. We have the ability to make a new future, a just future, for ourselves, for our relations with black people in this country. I am asking you now, will you stand up? Will you stand up right now? Will you stand up in this auditorium and help fight UTN's institutional, systemic racism, white supremacy? Thank you very much. We take questions.
You said at the beginning that African Americans have a higher rate of infant mortality. Why do you think that is?
This is statistic. Oh, you want the reason? Many reasons. We have a segregated housing market in large parts of the United States today, for one example. And segregated black communities are, relative to nearby white communities, relatively powerless. A city wants to build a new toxic waste incinerator. Let's stick it in the black community. Let's stick it next to the black community. Black community itself may be built up on the site of an old toxic dump. So that's one reason. Another reason, I've just read an article recently on this, is that white doctors don't treat black patients the same way that they treat white patients. I'm sure that there's many other reasons, but those are two very clear ones.
I agree with both of those, but I also have a slight counter-argument.
Okay.
It's proven that African Americans have a higher rate of hypertension, which in pregnancy leads to preeclampsia, which leads to infant mortality. Do you...
And why do you think we would have a higher incidence of hypertension?
It's a proven statistic from the American Nurses.
Yes,
That's not what I asked. What I'm asking you is, why do you think there's
Well,
a
I
higher...
agree with you,
Okay,
but
but
statistically,
No, we're not questioning the statistics. What we're saying is the hype. Go ahead, Joyce. I'm sorry.
I'm not doubting or challenging your fact, but can you tell us why you think that hypertension is a bigger problem in black and brown people?
Yes, ma'am, I can. That's why I'm here tonight, to learn more and educate myself.
But I'm waiting to hear what you think.
I don't know, that's why I'm here this evening, to learn more, but I just know statistically that is a proven fact.
You're right about it being a fact. So let me try and help you understand why.
Please.
Because America is a racist, white supremacist country. And being black or brown or different sexual orientation or another religion or faith in this country, it's hard living here. But it's where I belong because I've been here. So maybe we should try and understand why. What's the root cause of maybe hypertension or diabetes or a whole array of health issues manifest themselves in black and brown people. So it's a little bigger than just understanding the statistic.
Yeah. Young lady in the back. Please speak loudly.
A lot of medical books teach that black people don't feel pain as well as white people. That we can take pain more, and most white doctors, which most doctors are white, don't believe when black women say they're in pain or I don't feel right, they just think they're making it up or they're making it up to get drugs. And with the hypertension and diabetes, a lot of that stems from slavery from when we would get the scraps from a pig, that's all we had to eat. So, growing up, that's all they taught their kids how to cook. Growing up, my grandma cooked the fat thing. That's bad. That's really bad. But over time, my family learned that's not gonna create our family a legacy of children if we're all dying at 40 and 50 years old. And a lot of kids that's in poverty, they don't have the opportunity.
That's right.
Fresh vegetables, and fresh fruit, and they don't understand, they don't know that what they're eating is affecting their health in the long run. And a lot of this is basically areas where they're not providing anything. Like grocery stores that provide fresh fruits and vegetables don't be in the area. And most stores get followed based on what's sold, not what's being eaten. So if you're being taught, oh, well, you don't eat this, you go to the store and buy it, that's all the store gonna provide you, and they don't understand the difference. So that's why most black people have hypertension. It's not because they want it and it's a choice, it's because they don't know any better, don't have the option to cook.
How do we teach the importance of
Louder.
Sorry, how do we teach the importance of Black history to children without including violence? And like, what age do you think we should start including violence in teaching children?
Well, that's a good question.
Can I say something?
Sometimes I get that question. What?
I learned about the Holocaust in 4th grade. I learned about people getting gassed. I learned about people, I mean, literally, I remember bawling my eyes out in 4th grade at the fact that that happened to those people. So I don't know why it's any different to hear about what happened here in America.
Yeah.
If a child is young enough to
Loud.
if a child is old enough to experience racism, I think they're old enough to learn about it.
Third grade, we had to watch a video of Twin Towers. So why does something perpetuate around people get taught to us
Yeah.
at a young age? That it's something that white people, to us, isn't taught at all. Like, I didn't hear about slavery until like middle school, but I heard about the Twin Towers falling in the third grade. Make it make sense.
Yes.
Doesn't it?
What steps do we take to incorporate this more?
Well-
How do we get this into public school systems?
What we're doing here tonight and what we're trying to do as far as winning an understanding at this level. And then we can But, you know, our administration didn't even challenge the K-12. But what I can do and what we can do here is what we can do here. I have very little confidence that we have the capacity to do much more than what we do here, but we can do something important here.
I was going to piggyback about when it came to talking about what age you should teach your children about racism. When I was in kindergarten, my teacher, she was white. She set me apart from my classmates. I was like them because I didn't understand color. She was like, you're black. And it was at that moment I understood my skin tone was different. So it shouldn't be any age. It could be really any age as long as they're able to talk and understand.
Other hands?
I would like to add to
Loud, please.
I would like to add that you said that the Twin Towers, and how many people in here were raised with the stories of, you know, Egypt, the slavery that went on there? Why is it different? Why are we talking about slavery then?
Yeah.
Why are we talking about slavery for blacks later on? Why are we talking about for violence for blacks later on?
Yeah.
I was raised on violence. Very intellectually, I was raised on violence. I read about slavery, I was about violence, but not Bible. So why didn't I learn about that?
I know that there is an African American history minor, and
He's putting you on the spot.
I know that there is an African American history minor here, and I would recommend anyone who is able to or has the time to take it because it gives you the opportunity to take the classes that we have here, but the main problem of those being they are only offered when needed. So it's honestly just up to us if we want to be able to take these classes. So if we want to learn about our true history of America, and not just Africans, but just of everyone, we just have to do it together, and we have to work together. Because when you look at that long list of classes, which there are about 17 of them, I believe only like 6 of them are permanent, or is it more like 11 of them are permanent and like 6 of them are held as needed. So it really is just up to us.
I would add one more thing about that. The African American Studies minor, there's no chairperson for the African American Studies minor. There's nobody overseeing the African American Studies minor. And as a result, the African American Studies minor just sits out there and people take it or not, as distinct from, and I'm not criticizing anybody here. I want to make it very clear I'm not criticizing, but we have a Women and Gender Studies minor, and we have a whole center over there, and that's being taken care of very well, I can see. But when it comes to the African American Studies minor, it ain't here. As part of the demands that we made 2 years ago, we demanded an African American Studies Institute. And out of that African American Studies Institute, that would be where the minor would be taken care of. But I do think that it's rather telling that we have an African American study minor that just floats along, as Bella put it.
I just have a question. We were doing some research on you and your teachings.
Oh,
and-
good.
Yes, and is it true that in your, you teach history, of course, in your history classes that you made white kids stand up and apologize to the black students in the class about slavery? Okay, because there has been countless comments on RateMyProfessor.com about you doing that. To
No.
students.
No, those can be lies, though. You didn't know that, right?
That's why I'm asking.
They not only can be the lies, but unless I missed a recent one, there are people who say, oh, all Barber talks about is slavery. And when he gets done talking about slavery, he talks about slavery some more. That's the closest thing that I've got to. I've never asked any white students to stand up and apologize. No, that's crazy.
Well, since we just experienced a little fiction, I want to remind people that in addition to the very fine selection of books that are available up there, the library has many more books, many of them nonfiction, and please feel free to stop by my office if you need any help finding me.
Okay. Kendall. tell some truth. Dan,
On top of that, I've been in every single one of his history 2 classes for the last 4 years. I've never experienced anything like that.
oh, where?
I sit outside of your classroom a lot because my class is for the class that I have. Well,
Speak louder, please.
so I have a class right after
Right.
yours in the same classroom. So I sit outside in the hallway a lot, and you talk about slavery a lot. And one time I heard you talking about how basically white people should be guilty that they are white.
I never said anything like that. I've never said anything like that. Period. I do
Wait,
think.
Dr. Hart, did you have a problem with what he said? Did you have an issue with what you overheard him saying?
I don't know why that.
So why didn't you stand up? Why didn't you say anything? Then, like, why didn't you pull him to the side? Hey, Dr. Barber, I overheard this. Can you help clarify? No? Okay.
I
Can
do.
I add something to that? So the environment that we are here to try to learn. She stood up and said something that she had just overheard, she had read, somebody had told her about, and she got laughed at by 3/4 of this room. So how is that the right environment to learn more about this and truly try to educate yourself?
Okay, we got a bunch of people.
Can I answer that though,
Okay.
Dr. Barber?
Go.
Okay, so that comment that she made, that was outlandish. Like that, you know people are gonna tell lies. Like you do know that. Racial professor is a form that people get to put whatever they want on there. They can say Dr. Barber is black if they wanted to. Like, if it was a real concern, right? Why bring it to this public forum? Why not pull Dr. Barber aside and ask him the question if it was a genuine concern?
I would like to add too that this being here today is if you're trying to learn and you're really open to learning this, why are you trying to
Have counter arguments.
have counter arguments, have these smirks on your face where you're just like, I don't really know. Let's try to find a way to dismiss what he's saying. Let's try to find a way to make me right. What happened in history, and we can't go back and change it. All we can do now is go forward from what happened. And if we have these attitudes of, that doesn't apply to me, or there has to be a reason, an underlying reason of why this is happening. It's because Dr. Barber's doing this, or it's because of these, medical things or whatever that black people did to themselves. That's not what happened. And that's what he's trying to explain. So instead of trying to make excuses for why things are the way they are, we have to acknowledge the history that brought us here. Thank you. I didn't.
This says two amendments of the bill were approved before the House and voted to pass it. The first restores responsibility to state of the board instead of the Tennessee Department of Education to ensure K-12 schools included multicultural diversity when developing framework for self-curriculum. So it is to educate.
But what did we learn? I learned that not all slaves had it that bad. Some of them got to be in the house and they got to do this and it wasn't really that bad. Like, just because we're learning it doesn't mean we're learning the truth,
Right.
And like I said, this is why,
And this is good, but
yeah.
we need to have a curriculum laid out to where, okay, we need to learn this, the kids need to learn this, this is what happened, it sucked, it's awful, it's
Right.
brutal, it's gory, it's not pretty. Kids need to learn this, and they need to understand it, but we need to have set points of, this needs to be said, this needs to be said, this needs to be said, and not just let teachers have free reign on whatever. Does that make sense?
First of all, I want to say I'm delighted that so many people are staying here And I think it's a recognition of the fact that we are trying to have an important conversation. On the other hand, it is not, determining what and when something is going to happen in K-12 is not something. The only thing that we can control is what we do here. And what I'm saying, and what I would like every white person in this audience to say, I want you to say it, is that we need the study of black history, a serious, required study of black history. That's what is going to enable us to be more compassionate, more intelligent human beings.
Because then we could ask these questions that you have, we would already know these things because we would have learned it in the class.
Bella, wait, I saw a young lady over here first.
I was just gonna say, over there, she said that she said that everything she said was of a genuine concern, and why didn't she go to you privately? But I think everything we're talking about here tonight right now is a genuine concern, so why would we talk about it privately with you whenever we can talk about it with all of us together?
Because I think this is turning into a bash Dr. Barber session, and that's, you don't believe that, okay? But you gonna take from what I believe because you don't believe that? That's the issue that we're having, is that systemic racism has got you to the point where you think that your priorities over trump my priorities. That's what it has. You interrupted me just to say, well, I don't. Well, it sounds like you do, okay? Because you interrupted me, meaning that what I have to say is not important. Not important for you to listen to. Anyway, this is turned into a Dr. Barber bash session, and that's not what this is about. This is about getting real results at UTM.
Yes. We're calling these two young women, and I've learned something from what Shantae has said here. The issue is not me.
No. I wanted to kind of say, just piggyback off of what she was saying, is it seems like a lot of the comments that some of us were laughing at, or concerns, were not even about your presentation at all. They were about you as a person, and it's kind of like this thing where, and this happens in politics a lot, someone brings up a problem, and in order to shut you up about the problem, you bring up something that's not related at all. And that's why we're laughing, because we're you are proving what he's talking about. And you don't, I don't think you're trying to be malicious about it, but you are, and that's why it's upsetting.
And I also just want to say the same thing. This isn't a personal attack against white people. It's not a personal attack against white people. He's not saying white people are bad, white people are evil. He's saying that we need to acknowledge that there is racism in this country, that we are a part of institutions that are racist. And by bringing up comments like that, you're villainizing people, and also people laugh at that because black people have been for years begging us to listen to them, listen to our struggles, listen to the things that we're going through, and instead of going, yes, I hear you, what can I do? You're going, well, actually, let me make it about how it's your fault. Let me make it about how it's this other white dude's fault, instead of listening to how we ourselves can change it.
As one of the few black professors on campus, I'm extremely excited about this dialogue. But for many of my students who are here, and specifically my white students, being a black person on this campus, even in this position, is exhausting. Because so much of what, especially the young lady up front, even with all of the research and education that I have, I'm constantly challenged, and I'm making this about me right now.
Yes.
But I'm constantly challenged in the information I provide on a daily basis. My colleagues could go into the classroom and say that there are 9 days of the week, and if he's a white male, that is what it is. I could say, well, based on this, and this, and provide the documentation. And my students will bury themselves under the ground to show that there's no way I could clearly be able to articulate let alone teach them. Now, I'm not saying this is for every white student, and I'm by no means in a position to tell you what to do. But if it's one thing that I would carry away from this conversation, is please make an effort to understand. You can never walk in my shoes. My shoes are far too big. But make an effort to understand that just because you haven't experienced it doesn't devalue the experience I have and those who look like me. Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Thank you. Wait. Let's get people who haven't spoken. Way in the back.
So you mentioned something about how I should be held accountable for what my ancestors did. Why do you believe that?
Not accountable for what they did, accountable for the consequences. There are 250 years of theft of black labor.
I must say, I speak for myself when I say this, but my ancestors, like my great-grandfather was a lawyer for specifically African Americans in the late 1800s. He has a scholarship with his name over at UTK for what he did. So my point or question is, you don't know everybody's ancestors and what they've done for other people, and with my great-grandfather being a lawyer, I feel like I shouldn't be held accountable for what my ancestors did.
It's not you being held accountable. It's literally just
Louder.
It's not you being held. It's just saying that you benefit from the system that was put in place by other old white people in the past. I'm not benefiting. My ancestors. I'm still suffering from what they've been. Like that's basically no one is saying you need to hold yourself. It's just you saying, yeah, I benefit from this, and it's not right that I do.
Because luckily your ancestors were able to be lawyers, and black people, their ancestors weren't able to be lawyers. So you're already set up for this generational wealth that they were not.
Young lady in the back, you're getting loud though. Yes.
So a lot of that is not all my ancestors because they were just that. I understand it. But over time, a lot of it gets blurred. It's like you did nothing at all.
I would add one thing here, and that is that black people were held in chains for 250 years. Nobody can deny that. Black people were then another 100 years under segregation. Now, black people still remain at the very bottom of American society. American society has been built up by all those years. And whether your ancestor had a direct role in whatever happened or not, you live in American society, and so therefore you have a responsibility, number one. And number two, this country has never even acknowledged what it has done to black people. We've never acknowledged it, much less tried to make reparation for it. And until we acknowledge it, until we acknowledge that, you know, let me back up a little bit. Let me back up and say this, that black people lived in a slave owning society for a long time. Did all the white people own slaves? No, actually a very small number of white people owned slaves. I used to say this. I used to say the slave owner would brutally torture, he would whip the slave. He would murder slaves. And although it's not generally talked about, he would rape black women, slaves. And I used to say with complete impunity. That is to say, with no legal consequence. That's absolutely right, no legal consequence. But there is impunity. There is a consequence for that man. It destroys his soul, these things that he does to others. All those other white people who are out there, they know what's going on. White people all over the country knew what was going on. It was okay with them. Their values were corrupted by living in that society. And those values continue to exist today. And those values continue to exist today in the fact that we tolerate this ongoing criminalization of black people, the ongoing denial of black people. Schools, the best schools, are never found in black communities, and so on and so on and so on. Those are the values that we have, although of course we claim great Christian values.
David, that's Dr.
No, you can call me David.
I think you started down a point, and I would like to reiterate that point. Until America can acknowledge and look in the mirror,
Yes.
and accept that America became America on the backs of black folks. 400,000 enslaved,
4 million.
4 million enslaved people working for 200 plus years for free, from sun up to sundown. Of course America is going to become the wealthiest nation in the world.
Really?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And until I'm excited about this conversation. I think we ought to do this once a month.
Please. Please. Yes.
To engage in these conversations. Because until we can have open, honest, sincere, painful, uncomfortable conversations, 50 years from today, somebody will be in here having this conversation. Although I probably will. Somebody will. Okay? Healing begins with acknowledging. It's not about blaming or shaming, trying to make people feel uncomfortable. But it is about getting people to acknowledge the truth about how America became America.
And that's exactly what we want to do by demanding a required class in this university to teach. That's what I said, that we need white people to make that demand. That would change the whole game.
I have two statements.
Loud, please.
I have two statements to make. The second one's going to be on the environment, on the class, but the first one is going to be, I feel like it's neglected a lot that, yeah, I'm not going to deny the fact that the South was ran in 1776 and stuff when our country was being formed, that the South was derived on slavery. So the slaves ran that, they allowed the agricultural industry to thrive in the South. Now, most of the northern states were free states, and they were industrial based. So the South is definitely where all the slavery was mostly. But I feel like we deny the fact that, I feel like it seemed that the white man went and took these slaves and captured them and enslaved them, but I feel like we always forget that it was the black people's ancestors and like rivalry tribes in Africa that sold the enslaved people to the white men.
Sir.
So is that like a neglected fact though?
No, the neglected factor is that you've got a little tidbit of information and you don't understand where that tidbit belongs. No, listen to me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for interrupting. But there is a real reason. Trade was definitely a key element. But do you know why that trade occurred? That trade occurred because the Europeans had guns. And what they offered to the African tribal leaders was guns. I suggest to you, sir, and if you don't take the guns, then we'll give it to the next tribe, and the next tribe will enslave your tribe and sell you off. I suggest to you, sir, that before you start talking about stuff that goes on in Africa, try to study some African history. Here's a book that you could read that tells you something about the African slave trade, the European slave trade, how Europe underdeveloped Africa. Read that book, and then come back and let's have the conversation, okay?
Yes, sir. Yeah, the triangle trade was definitely a big problem, and the triangle trade ended in 1808. But you know, I feel like all the blame gets put on the white man. That's not all the white man's fault.
Oh my God.
My second point.
Where? Oh, second question.
My second point was, I don't feel like you'll ever be able to get it passed as a requirement, just because we can't even teach religion in school. You know, a lot of countries are derived on religion or derived from Christianity over from the churches. Like, if we can't teach religion in schools and make that a requirement, I don't think we should, you know, make this a requirement. But here's my solution to you. Instead of trying to make it a requirement, start when you said you have no head of the department of this minor. Start at the head of the problem. You know, try to find somebody who's backing and supporting you and have the head of this. You know, advertise this minor. You know, I didn't really know about the minor until tonight. I didn't know that there was one. So maybe find a head of that department, advertise it more.
I'm not on the administration here, and maybe one of the administrators here could hear what you just said. I think it'd be an excellent idea to get a head over an African-American historian to head that, which means we would have to hire somebody, which would be very good. If we have the requirement, we're going to have to hire a lot of black professors.
I have a question. What religion would you teach?
The main religion is Christianity.
Why can't we teach this?
Because our countries, I mean, we can, but we're not derived from an Islamic religion.
Well, what about the Muslim students who go to schools? Why can't they learn about that? Why do they gotta learn about Christianity? Something they don't believe in.
Well, I mean, you know.
All right.
I'm not saying.
He said we can't make religion a requirement. Of course, but if we did make it a requirement, why would it be Christianity and not any other religion?
But that's not, I mean, it is history, but we're talking about putting a requirement African American history, not religion. It's your history too. Black people were here, you were here. It involves you. But we're not
Ladies and gentlemen,
we're talking about race.
first of all, I don't want anybody to go with I want you to buy some books.
Please.
We need knowledge. Second of all, before we close, if anybody, any white student or anybody else who wants to build a movement to require black history on this campus, please sign up.
I got you.